Yes. So I still have hope, a lot of hope for our marginalized, because like I said, sometimes we just need institutional change. We just need some things to change here and there so that we can be able to understand and therefore allow other people to also have access. If you look at my two maps, the one that is to the left, the colorful one, I just want to emphasize that all those colorful areas show areas of nature preservation, both wildlife in the sense of vegetation as well as animals. So we have the sanctuaries, the forest areas, the state land, recreational parks, game parks, national parks. But the gray, which you see, represents the areas which are occupied by our people. So they are also following the border areas. But the reason why I put the second map is for you to realize the disadvantages of the areas where we have the African community. If you look carefully, you see that the Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the 4 and the 5 are the areas which are arid. They are dry areas, naturally just by because of the climate that is experienced there by nature. These areas are dry and the soils are poor. Most of them are Karoo soils. So there's low rainfall or there's erratic rainfall. Whereas where it says 1, 2, 3, 1 is in Manicaland, and then the 2 and the 3 in the middle of the country shows areas which are rich. And if you go back to the first map, it tells us that these are the areas where commercial farming is taking place. So what is the problem with that? The problem is that the people in these areas are already exposed to the vagaries of nature. They are already in areas that are not productive. So what happened now when the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species was endorsed in 1975? It actually regulated the trade of wildlife and also wildlife products. But we know that people from our communities or from the communities that are in the rural areas, they depend directly on nature. It's not like the modern people who can just go to a store and get their milk and get their veggies from there. So this altered their lifestyle because now they could not touch those animals. If they were found in the park, they could be shot or they would be prosecuted. So they had no access to some of the resources that they already had and that were used to once the park system was established. For Zimbabwe, it was the policy of the National Land Apportionment Act and the Land Husbandry Act, which were introduced, which actually divided the land among the people in the country, leaving the peripheral areas, which are the marginal zones, to some of the African communities. But the major thing are the appendices. Appendix 1, it talks about animals that are threatened. These are animals as well as vegetation that are threatened, and we're supposed to protect them by not hunting them, by not cutting them or trading in them. So we find that some of the animals that are huge, such as the elephants, especially in Southern Africa, most of them fell into that category. And then in Appendix 2, it would be those animals that if we continue hunting them, they would then also become threatened, and therefore there to be a stop in the trade in these animals and their byproducts. Then Appendix 3, a bit more flexible. If a country would think, oh, we have a pangolin in here as Zimbabweans, Zambians, let's protect this species because it's actually going to also be threatened in the future. So the states agree to protect that particular species. So like I said, we have a lot of these animals. Each one fell into different categories throughout the whole world because the CITES was actually signed by so many, ratified by so many nations. So as you look at them, you would have to know that this one is in which category. But this was only for the official documentation. Do you think the people in the countryside knew about that? What they just needed was a livelihood. So what went wrong? The thing is, the CITES is a very noble idea because we all talk about biodiversity. We want to sustain lives now and into the future. We talk about sustainable development. But does that mean anything to somebody who is on the ground? This is where my quest is. Because when the CITES was introduced in the 1970s, it meant that there were stricter rules on control of the movement of animals, as well as the people getting access to the animals. But then this was an international convention, and the government also during that time, if I may say, it was colonial. So the interest of the government and the interest of the people on the ground was different. So you find that as the CITES was being affected throughout Southern Africa and also elsewhere in the world, the animals began to increase. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But the idea was, how is it helping the person on the ground who's supposed to earn a living? So this is where the conflict was. People started to see the animals as something that belonged to the government, and therefore they were not allowed to touch. It was untouchable. These animals were well protected. But in the protective areas is where also their grass, their wood, everything that they needed, whether it was the timber products or the non-timber products, the honey, the worms, the leaves, the medicinal plants, everything was mostly in the national parks, because in the rural areas, people also started to multiply, and therefore there was depletion of biodiversity. That's why I'm saying it's kind of like a controversial issue, because you would think, yes, leaving the parks untouched is good, only, yes, for the biodiversity. So it wasn't a good thing, or they weren't catering for the interests of the people. I remember one time I took my students to the Zambezi Valley, and we went to the Zambezi National Park, and we actually had a chance to walk on the ground, because they said it was in October, it was what the animals rarely would touch them. So there were these guards who were with us. And we saw these dead trees that were lying down. A whole tree, you could see those are the branches, except of course the leaves were dead. But we could see these dead trees. And some of my students started to ask questions like, this is a dead tree, what do you do with it? Do you help those villagers? Because we'd passed through a village very close to the national park. And the guard who spoke with us, who was with us at all times, he said, oh, no, 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 no. People are not allowed in here. But we help the people by chasing the lions when they come to their village to actually eat the livestock. So while that was the truth, but it was really hurting, because you could see that there was not much that the people were getting from the national park. And I'm just saying this because there are things that can be revised. Like if we could have some people arrange in such a way that the villagers can periodically go into the national park and gain some resources, it would be better. So this is what is a problem with this arrangement. So now, while all this is happening, they are not having access to resources. There comes climate change. Climate change is affecting everyone, but disproportionately. And we talked about this with the presenters that actually were in the seminar last week, highlighted a lot of this. It's called a threat multiplier because they are already threats. People are facing severe shocks and stresses in their life. Now comes a time when the droughts have increased, when now the erratic rains have increased, the problem of water scarcity has increased because of climate change, something again that the people have no control over. This is what makes the livelihoods of these people really miserable, because now they even have to get more from that place when they are supposed to, where they are supposed not to get much. I remember even when the whole program of Campfire was introduced in Zimbabwe, it started in Zimbabwe, started by the Department of National Parks and Wildlife. They actually realized that, oh, the people are suffering. Let's try to solve this problem of the conflict between animals and the people. Because surely if the animals would come and eat the crops, the people would be sad. If they come and kill their goats and sheep, they would be hurt. So when they tried to solve that by introducing the Campfire projects. But now this Campfire project didn't last in many areas because there again was poor governance over the resources that were got either through hunting safaris, the resources which were supposed to go to the community. Sometimes they would not reach there because of corruption and all that. So we're talking about stress now, where there is already a problem and climate change is coming in and making it worse. The biodiversity stress, the degradation of ecosystems, the women who are disproportionately affected by climate change, traveling long distances to get water with their girls. And then again, we also have low agricultural output because there are poor rains, there are poor soils. Remember, I showed you the map that these areas have carousels, they have poor soils. So all that is exacerbating the problems of the communities that are marginalized. So there is hunger, there is starvation, and obviously it leads to famine. Some countries in Africa have already experienced that. So we do have these challenges that are coming, but the governments, I think, have a mandate. Yesterday, I attended almost like 3/4 of a day, a workshop on climate change. They were really talking to us, dealing with perceptions and attitudes. And my first thing was, why are they talking to us here in the urban areas? We need to go down to the countryside and talk to the people, or at least bring the people. But I realized that this guy who was addressing us, he had very noble ideas, beautiful ideas that the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change has already put together. But the thing is, there are very few people in the countryside who would understand that. I know for sure, because I carried out a study on climate change in my own rural area, which is also another area that is devastated, and it's in region 4, where there is really a bad climate and poor soils. So what I noted was that some of these government projects, while they are very good, but they are not broken down to be understood by people in the rural areas. When I was in my home area, as I was saying, the first question that was thrown at me was, who are you? What do you want? We have had these government people and NGOs come to our area, and we have not seen a difference in the things that they are doing. So I think the government has to do much from where they are now. It's not just Zimbabwe, but we need more from the government to really reach the people. When I asked them about the Zim asset, which is one of the very beautiful documents that was produced in Zimbabwe to help with the development process in Zimbabwe, they didn't know about it. I had a copy. Then I realized, wow, this copy is an English one. So what if there are no teachers or nurses to interpret? People didn't even know that Zim asset allowed them to actually borrow from the government and get assets which they could use for their livelihoods, because it was never, or it never reached that particular community. So I know governments are trying, but I think you are saying, let's push more, because even now when they started this project, it's dealing with people in the urban areas. Why not go and start with the people in the community, in the communities that are actually suffering, that are marginalized? We need the input of the government to even be stronger. We need government willpower to be able to engage these people in the communities, because sometimes, I know as a geographer, I learned and did a lot of case studies in my classes on rural neglect. It's not a new thing. I think the governments have to realize that there is also an issue of rural neglect, because if they focus on other areas for political reasons or whatever, they cannot do that. They cannot do justice. That is not justice. Perhaps we should be just talking about injustice. It's an injustice act. We need everyone who belongs to a particular nation to pull together, and those who are weak, who need to be capacitated so that they can even start their own projects. You might say, but there are a lot of projects that have been done. Yes, but who has mapped that? Who has mapped the success of these projects? I still feel the government needs to go beyond what it is doing for Zimbabwe, and also even in other countries in Southern Africa. I know Namibia and Zimbabwe have been popularly speaking about pulling out of the CITES. I think Namibia actually really ended up doing that. But I was frustrated when there was the meeting in Johannesburg to review some of the issues in CITES so that this can be re-evaluated, in the sense that when people were challenging the system, the CITES and the issues pertaining to that, they were talking about increasing their hunting quota. We want to increase the hunting quota for the leopards to go up to 500. We want to go beyond that. They were really talking about an economic issue, but no one was really driving the issue of the marginalized. And this is why I'm actually concerned about these things, and why we are saying people are speaking out, but they are not being heard. Governments might be driving for change, but that change might not necessarily be getting to the communities that are affected. So a lot of things can be done. I just threw them there so that at least some of them you could be able to read and understand. The whole issue of gender mainstreaming, it has been, I think, 20 years now, Zimbabwe has been talking about gender mainstreaming, to make sure that in whatever we do, there's gender mainstreaming. But have we mapped the success? That's my point. Because why is it that when we go to the communities, we still find people talking about the same story? So this is where my issue is. We need justice, because justice talks about people of different race, creed, color, whatever, having access and opportunity to protection against the vagaries of nature, and also just opportunity to access the resources. And if you look at what is happening now, and also even the very reason why environmental justice was started in the US, it was because there were those disparities. And if we don't address them for any reason whatsoever, that is a big problem. So we talk about making sure that there is devolution, but while there's devolution, other people are thinking of taking advantage of a system, and then there's greed. So then the marginalized become even worse off. So we really need a mapping of success, not just mapping of problems. Can we now move on to say how many projects have been successful and why? Even the gentleman who was presenting yesterday, he actually said, we went to the Chimanimani where Cyclone Idai hit the most, and we found that people were still as miserable as they were during the cyclone. There wasn't much. Of course, the government has started now the rehabilitation of the area, but they didn't go too far. And so this is what we're talking about. Can we start things and end them so that we can be able to see people change? As far as I know, even from the studies that I did, people are still struggling, and we have to find a way of dealing with that. We can't just keep blaming even the cities. We can't just keep on going there. We need our government to change its political will to address these issues for the good of the people, not just for themselves. So what can be done? These justice issues, people have to know about this. The government has to be very deliberate in the way it deals with people in its own areas. And then also we need to engage one another. I'm glad we have a course here on campus that's environmental diplomacy, and I've got very, very a bright class this particular year where students ask questions like, until when? Until when, with all these issues happening, now we have the issue of minerals that are being usurped, and we have conflict because of that. People who are the richest, perhaps in the deep jungles of the Congo, because of the resources they have, but they are the poorest because they are actually not being managed well. The resources there, somebody's coming in and say, dig, and I'll give you this, and the people remain poor. When will this end? There must be something that can be done by this government to say, yes, we see the resource conflict. Yes, let's deal with it. All the wars that we have in East Africa, that we have always had, the armed conflict is all about the resources. So there is a need for people to demand justice. And if they do, we want the governments to hear what the people are saying. So we need to increase their participation in these huge or famous conventions. We just don't want people to represent them. We want them to be there. And I like this. My husband always says that if you can't be brought to the table, find your own table and bring people there. So we want to see some change. Even the people I'm also talking about to our communities, they need also to have a drive. They also need to make sure that they also act, so that we don't just have people that represent perhaps partially their issues. So we need to build again strong alliances within our region so that we can support one another and really cater for the marginalized, because they are there. Even if we shut them out and we pretend they are not there, they are there. And this is the whole idea I have. I hope one day we can be able to have more stringent measures put on these policies that affect our people. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Obrigado. Tinotenda siyabonga.